Welcome to the Deep Dive. We have a really fascinating mission for you today, especially if you spent any time navigating the sprawling and honestly pretty messy continuity of comic book history.
Oh, yeah. Messy is definitely the right word for it.
Right. So we're looking at a Wikipedia article we pulled from our sources detailing a deeply obscure but incredibly complex DC Comics character.
Named King Standish.
Yes, King Standish. And our goal today is to examine how a wealthy, sophisticated master of disguise from the 1940s operated in the criminal underworld, fought off supernatural entities, and left this bizarre modern-day legacy.
And did it all without ever actually showing his true face to anyone, including the reader.
Exactly. It's wild.
It is a really unique slice of the archives we're opening up for you today. When we examine Golden Age superheroes, we're looking at an era that laid the foundation for everything we read now.
Yeah, the 1940s.
Right. The 1940s publishers were throwing entirely untested concepts at the wall to see what resonated with readers. And King Standish is a prime example of that unfiltered experimental pulp energy. He exists right at this intersection of noir detective tropes and the emerging superhero genre.
Okay, let's unpack this right from his very first appearance.
Yeah.
According to the source, King Standish debuts in the pages of Flash Comics issue number 3.
Which hit newsstands in March of 1940.
March 1940. And he was created by the team of writer Gardner Fox and artist William Smith. And since we were talking about Gardner Fox, and we already know the pedigree here.
Oh, absolutely.
We're looking at the exact same creative DNA that gave us the original Flash, Jay Garrick, Dr. Fate, Hawkman, and literally the very concept of the Justice Society of America.
That is a crucial piece of context for you to keep in mind as we analyze Standish. Because if you look at the footer of this Wikipedia article, the sheer volume of foundational lore Fox generated is staggering.
It's massive.
Standish isn't just some random throwaway character by a freelance writer. He shares a creator with the heavyweights that still anchor the DC universe today. He was conceived by an architect of the medium.
Which makes his relative obscurity all the more interesting to dissect. It really makes you wonder why he didn't achieve the same lasting household name status as his peers.
Yeah, why did Hawkman survive and Standish fade away?
Part of it might honestly be his aesthetic.
Yeah.
Which is definitely a product of its time. When he isn't actively disguised as someone else, his default recognizable hero look isn't tights.
Or a cape with a family crest.
Right. It's a tuxedo, an opera cape, a top hat, and a domino mask. He looks like a high society socialite stepping out of a gala rather than a brawler patrolling the docks.
It perfectly captures that wealthy vigilante trope of the 1930s, you know, the bored rich guy looking for a thrill. But what's fascinating here is his moniker, the Man of 1,000 Faces.
The Man of 1,000 Faces.
Yes. The text explicitly states a truly staggering narrative choice made by Fox and Smith. His actual face and his actual real name are never revealed.
Never. Not once.
Think about the narrative mechanics of that for a moment. You are reading a comic book where the protagonist is fundamentally lying to you, the audience, in every single panel.
That is a massive creative risk, because you usually build a connection with a character by seeing their vulnerability, by seeing who they are when the mask comes off.
Exactly. You need the Bruce Wayne behind the Batman.
Right. But with King Standish, there is no unmasking. He is a total cipher. The article notes that he was actually considered a criminal by both the police and the underworld.
Which makes sense.
It does. He operates in this completely isolated, paranoid space because nobody can verify his identity.
It creates a unique type of dramatic tension that you don't often see, even in modern books. Because his methods rely on total deception, he cuts himself off from the society he is supposedly protecting.
He's on his own island.
He is. He exists in a liminal space between the law and the lawless. If you place yourself in the shoes of a reader in 1940, you are conditioned to trust the hero implicitly. But how do you trust a hero who might be the cop in one scene, the mob boss in the next, and a random bystander on the street?
You can't.
You are forced to constantly question the reality of the narrative.
And when push comes to shove, his methods aren't exactly clean either. The source notes he was a skilled hand-to-hand combatant, a master illusionist, and he made occasional use of guns.
Ah, yes. The occasional use of guns.
That last detail really firmly plants him in that early Golden Age era, before the editorial mandate scrubbed lethal weapons from the hands of primary protagonists.
It highlights the blurred lines of the era. The distinction between a pulp magazine detective who would absolutely carry a firearm and a comic book superhero was practically non-existent in 1940.
They were basically the same thing.
Standish used whatever tools were necessary to neutralize a threat. Which brings us to the kinds of threats he was actually neutralizing.
That transitions us perfectly into his rogues gallery, or at least his most prominent recurring rival. He frequently clashed with a character simply known as the Witch.
The Witch.
Yeah, and her gimmick wasn't magic. She was actually a fellow master of disguise. Her abilities basically rivaled his own.
A mirror image villain is a classic narrative tool, but applying it to the concept of disguise elevates the conflict immensely. You have this cat and mouse game between two individuals where neither combatant has any idea what the other truly looks like.
It's just two fake people fighting.
It is a battle of pure espionage and psychological deduction rather than just physical force.
What stands out to me is how that conflict resolves. The source states that Standish didn't just defeat her, he actually convinced her to switch sides and help him in his fight against the criminal underworld.
Wow.
Yeah, instead of a punitive resolution, we get rehabilitation.
That is a brilliant observation, and it reflects a uniquely golden age optimism. It is a stark contrast to the highly cynical, punitive justice we often see in modern comic narratives.
Where villains are just perpetually locked up in Arkham Asylum only to break out again next month.
Exactly. The rehabilitation of the witch tells us that Standish, despite his shadowy, deceptive methods, viewed crime as a behavioral puzzle that could be solved and redirected, not just an inherent evil to be punished.
That's a great way to put it.
It gives us a glimpse of a strong moral compass beneath all the masks.
But that moral compass gets a massive test when the world changes around him. As we move into the World War II era, the scope of comic book storytelling shifted globally, and Standish shifted with it.
The war changed everything.
It really did. The article mentions he was contacted by a mysterious figure known as Control, and he was recruited to join the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS.
This represents a pivotal evolution in his publication history. We see his in-universe reputation completely transform. He goes from being an illegal street vigilante, actively hunted by local police, to a sanctioned intelligence operative for the Allied forces.
It actually makes perfect sense when you look at his skill set. If you need someone to infiltrate enemy lines, gather intelligence, and sabotage operations without being detected, you don't send a guy who shoots lasers from his eyes.
No, that would be terrible espionage.
You send a guy whose entire life is built on deep-covered deception.
Precisely. The very skills that made him a menace to the domestic underworld made him an invaluable asset for international espionage. The text notes he remained with the OSS until the war concluded.
Which is a cool, real-world tie-in.
It anchors King Standish firmly in the real-world history of the 1940s. It serves as a reflection of how comic book publishers adapted their characters to support the war effort.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because once the war is over, he doesn't just go back to busting local mob bosses in his tuxedo. His narrative takes a sharp turn into the supernatural.
The weird stuff.
Yes. The source details a specific encounter with an antagonist named Jacob Tolzman.
This is where the pulp espionage genre collides abruptly with Golden Age fantasy. The Justice Society of America is involved in this specific storyline, but the situation is dire.
Very dire.
The source points out that two major JSA figures, the Wesley Dodds incarnation of Sandman and the Star-Spangled Kid, have been knocked completely out of commission by this supernatural threat.
The heavy hitters are down for the count, so the responsibility falls to their sidekicks, Sandy the Golden Boy and Stripesy, alongside King Standish.
What a trio.
If you're those sidekicks, the panic has to be setting in. Your mentors are unconscious, there is a literal supernatural entity on the loose, and your only tactical support is a guy in an opera cape who solves problems with prosthetics and spirit gum.
It is a decidedly desperate scenario. Standish doesn't possess superhuman strength or mystical abilities. He cannot simply overpower a supernatural force like Tolzman through physical combat.
You can't just punch a ghost.
No. He has to rely entirely on his intellect and his specific mastery of illusion.
And the tactic he employs is wildly creative. He doesn't try to disguise himself as a more powerful monster. He uses his skills to disguise himself as Jacob Tolzman's father.
That is just incredible.
He impersonates the villain's dad to create a distraction. And it actually works. It works long enough for Sandy and Stripesy to deliver the winning blow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of tactical combat in comics, this is a masterclass in psychological warfare.
It really is.
Standish recognized the futility of a physical confrontation and instead targeted the enemy's emotional and psychological vulnerabilities. Weaponizing family trauma to disorient a supernatural threat is undeniably dark.
Yeah, that's messed up.
It is, but it is highly effective. It elevates Standish from a simple master of disguise to a deeply calculating cerebral tactician. He understands that a well-placed emotional shock can be just as devastating as a physical punch.
He effectively neutralized a supernatural being by playing on its daddy issues. That is top-tier strategic thinking.
Absolutely.
Now, after the Golden Age, characters like Standish often get relegated to the dusty archives of DC history. But the source outlines how his legacy was unexpectedly revived decades later.
The modern revival.
Yes. We fast forward to the modern era. Specifically, Justice Society of America, Volume 3, Issue number 29, published in July of 2009, the JSA roster gets a new addition, a guy named King Chimera.
The introduction of King Chimera serves as a crucial bridge between the experimental pulp of the 1940s and the structured legacy of modern comics. Chimera drops a significant piece of lore, revealing that his father was, in fact, King Standish.
And the backstory Chimera provides regarding his father is fascinating. He explains that Standish traveled to a distant island to meet with a member of a secret order, specifically to perfect the art of illusion.
A secret order on a distant island. That's a classic comic book trope.
It tells us that Standish wasn't just relying on natural talent or some makeup kit he bought at a pharmacy in Gotham. He was actively traveling the globe, seeking out esoteric knowledge to master his craft.
It adds a layer of global mythology to the character that didn't exist in his original run. Modern writers often utilize these obscure Golden Age figures to anchor new characters. It gives a fresh face like King Chimera immediate historical weight and a sense of belonging within the broader DC lore.
It also brings up a rather humorous continuity issue, which the comic itself actually addresses. If you track the timeline, Standish was an active adult crime fighter in 1940. King Chimera debuts as a young man in 2009.
The math doesn't quite work.
It doesn't. And Chimera casually mentions in the text that his mother, quote-unquote, had a thing for older men.
It is a clever, somewhat dark piece of meta-commentary by the writers. Comic book timelines are notoriously fluid, and addressing a 60-year age gap with a dry quip acknowledges the absurdity of comic continuity without completely derailing the narrative.
Right, they just lampshade it and move on?
But it also inadvertently enhances the mystique of Standish. How did he maintain his vitality? Did his time with that secret order involve life extension techniques?
Ooh, that's a good point.
Or perhaps was the King Standish, who fathered Chimera, simply a successor who took up the mantle? The source leaves that entirely ambiguous.
Which is exactly how you want a master of disguise to operate, always leaving you with more questions than answers. But the comics aren't the only place we've seen this legacy explored recently.
You made it to the screen.
He did. The Wikipedia article notes that Standish actually made the jump to live-action television in the Stargirl series, specifically in the episode titled Frenemies. Chapter 12, The Last Will and Testament of Sylvester Pemberton.
Adapting deeply obscure Golden Age characters for modern television is always a delicate process. The Stargirl series was heavily invested in exploring the legacy of the JSA, making it a logical place for Standish to appear.
It makes sense he'd show up there.
However, the iteration portrayed by actor Alan Andrews meets a decidedly grim fate.
Yeah, the television universe does not offer him a heroic send-off at all. The article details that in this adaptation, Standish is depicted merely as a socialite, and he is murdered by the classic villain, the Ultrahumanite, who is operating at the time through the body of Dolores Winters.
It is a brutal narrative choice. It strips away the enigmatic triumph of his comic book counterpart and just reduces him to collateral damage.
He's basically just cannon fodder.
However, from a screenwriting perspective, sacrificing a legacy character like Standish serves to immediately establish the lethal stakes. It shows the sheer power of the Ultrahumanite. It utilizes the historical weight of the King Standish name to signal to the audience that the new generation of heroes in Stargirl are facing a genuinely severe threat.
It's the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of the plot. But returning to the source material, the comic book iteration of the character has a much more fitting, if pretty unsettling, conclusion.
Unsettling is right.
The biography section of the article ends with a single sentence regarding his current status. Quote, King Standish's current activities and whereabouts were not recorded, unquote.
That is perhaps the most narratively satisfying conclusion possible for a character defined by his absence of identity.
He really is.
There is no grand final battle. There is no public retirement or unmasking. A man whose entire existence was predicated on anonymity, deception, and the spaces between identities simply fades back into the margins of the universe.
So what does this all mean? We've tracked a character through the very DNA of the DC universe today. We started with a nameless street vigilante in 1940s pulp comics who isolated himself from society to fight crime.
And rehabilitated villains along the way.
Right. We followed him as his unique skill set was co-opted by the government for OSS espionage during World War II. We saw him utilize deeply unsettling psychological tactics to defeat supernatural threats alongside the JSA sidekicks.
Pretending to be a monster's dad. Still iconic.
Still iconic. And finally, we explored how his legacy was revived to anchor a new generation in 2009 with King Chimera, and adapted for television just to raise the stakes.
What it means is that King Standish operates as the ultimate blank slate in superhero fiction. In a genre populated by characters who are rigidly defined by their tragic origins, their specific moral codes, and their brightly colored emblems, Standish is defined entirely by his adaptability.
He is whatever the story needs him to be.
Because he possesses no fixed identity, he can seamlessly transition into any narrative space. He can be a noir detective, a wartime spy, a supernatural tactician, or an elusive father figure. He is the ultimate chameleon, reflecting whatever the writers and the era required him to be.
He is a fascinating reflection of the medium's history. It has been incredibly rewarding digging into the archives with you all to map out the bizarre, hidden life of the man of 1,000 faces.
Before we conclude, this raises an important question for you to consider. If an individual spends their entire life, from fighting gangsters in the 1940s to engaging in global espionage, to traveling the world seeking out secret orders, constantly inhabiting the faces, voices, and lives of thousands of other people.
It takes a toll.
It does. What remains of the original person underneath? After decades of flawlessly executing perfect illusions, does the real King Standish even exist anymore? Or did the man himself simply evaporate, leaving nothing behind but the ultimate disguise?
That is a haunting concept to wrap up on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the obscure corners of comic lore. Keep questioning the continuity, keep exploring the archives, and we will catch you on the next one.